The diner was nearly empty when the two officers spotted her, sitting alone in the corner booth, her faded jacket draped over shoulders that had carried more weight than anyone in that room could imagine. They noticed only the color of her skin and the worn patches on her sleeves, not the quiet steel in her eyes. One whispered, the other smirked, and together they walked toward her table with the easy confidence of men who believed the world bent for them. 30 seconds later, they would freeze, because on her table, beneath her trembling hand, lay something that would shatter every assumption they made. If you want more powerful stories that expose truth, challenge injustice, and reveal the humanity behind every struggle, then subscribe to my channel, Racism Untold Stories. Your support helps these narratives reach more hearts and inspire real change. The morning unfolded with a cold, gray stillness that wrapped the small town like a heavy blanket. Dawn had barely stretched across the sky when the doors of the roadside diner opened to release a thin whisper of warmth into the crisp air. Inside, the scent of burnt coffee and buttered toast lingered like an old memory, comforting to some, forgettable to most. Regulars filled their usual places, forming an unspoken pattern of familiarity that repeated day after day. At the far booth, near a window streaked with condensation, sat the woman no one truly saw. Her presence created no ripple. She was simply another quiet figure in a world that rarely slowed down enough to understand her. Her name was Sergeant Lena Marshall, though the people in this town knew nothing of that name. They saw only a solitary black woman with a worn duffel bag and tired eyes, blending into the muted corners of a room that believed it held all the authority it needed. Lena had chosen the diner for its anonymity. It was the kind of place where strangers passed through unnoticed, where a person could sit long enough to gather thoughts that felt heavy enough to crush bone. She watched the steam from her coffee curl upward like a thin veil, rising before dissolving into nothing. The cup warmed her hands, but did little to thaw the ache that settled deep inside her ribs. The walls around her carried framed photographs of local police award ceremonies, high school sports victories, and smiling families that represented the town's belief in its own goodness. Yet none of the frames held faces that looked like hers. The contrast was subtle, but it was loud enough for her to feel it in her chest. She had grown accustomed to being the outsider in rooms that claimed to welcome everyone. Outside, the wind hummed across the parking lot, carrying dust, dry leaves, and the faint echo of memories she often tried to bury. A long career in service had given her scars that were not visible. They lingered in the way she exhaled, in the way her fingers curled into a fist when the diner door opened too quickly, in the way she positioned her back against a wall where she could see every exit. Lena was not homeless, she was not lost, she was not adrift in the world, but she had reached a crossroads that demanded stillness before movement. She had spent months traveling from base to base, office to office, searching for answers that no superior wanted to speak aloud. The injury that ended her career had been dismissed as unfortunate. The dismissals, the looks, the silence that followed her medical discharge had cut deeper than the pain in her leg. She had given everything to her country, but when she needed support in return, she discovered that loyalty flowed only in one direction. Yet this was not why she sat alone at the diner that morning. She had come to this town for a different reason, one she carried close to her chest. A letter lay tucked inside her duffel bag, folded so many times that its creases were beginning to tear. It was from an organization dedicated to veterans who had been overlooked, misjudged, or mistreated. They had invited her to join a ceremony not far from this diner, a ceremony meant to honor those who had endured systemic neglect and still rose above it. Lena had hesitated for weeks before accepting the invitation. She still wondered if she deserved to stand among them. As she sipped her coffee, people moved around her without really seeing her. Conversations fluttered like low-hanging static, filled with local gossip, small worries, and easy laughter. To them, this was an ordinary morning. To her, it was the fragile edge of a turning point. The first seed of tension sprouted when a group of off-duty police officers arrived, their boots thumping heavily on the diner floor. They carried the confident air of men who believed their authority extended even beyond their shifts. Their badges did not rest on their chests at the moment, but the weight of their status clung to them like a second skin. They took a table near the center of the room, laughing loudly, unaware of how their presence stirred the air around them. Lena felt their entrance before she saw them. Years of training sharpened her senses and taught her to read a room in seconds. The officers did not look dangerous, but there was something familiar about the careless way they occupied space. the way they assumed the world belonged to them. She had seen this posture in military barracks, government offices, and war zones where arrogance led to destruction. She tried to return to her thoughts, but the past and present collided in her mind, creating a storm she struggled to suppress. The diner around her became a silent reminder of battles she had fought, both abroad and at home. Every scrape on her jacket, every stitch on her duffel bag, every faded patch on her sleeve told a story of resilience, carved by necessity, not choice. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes but weary posture, approached her table. She refilled Lena's cup with a gentle nod. There was no pity in her expression, no judgment, only a small flicker of human recognition. Lena appreciated that more than she could express. Small gestures often carried the greatest weight, but as the officers glanced toward her, their expressions shifted. Their eyes skimmed over her clothing, her skin, her bag. They did not see a veteran. They did not see a hero. They did not see a woman who had endured more than they would ever comprehend. They saw only what their biases had taught them to expect. A whisper passed between them, a smirk followed. Their interests sharpened in a way that felt less like curiosity and more like quiet hostility. Lena remained still, but inside her chest, a familiar burn began to rise. She had faced worse than arrogance. She had survived worse than prejudice. Yet the sting of being misjudged in her own country never dulled. Outside, clouds gathered over the horizon, forming dark shapes, as if mirroring the tension building within the diner. The room felt colder, though the temperature had not changed. A storm was coming, not of weather, but of truth. Lena placed her hand on the table, her fingers brushing against the object she always kept close. The truth of who she was rested beneath her touch. It held the weight of sacrifice, honor, and an identity forged through relentless struggle. She knew what it represented. They did not yet. The seed of injustice had been planted. The moment of misunderstanding had taken root. The room continued moving, as if nothing had happened, but something had shifted, and the quiet storm inside the diner had begun its slow, inevitable rise. The officers settled into their booth with the casual dominance of men who believed every room should shift around them. Their laughter grew louder, their voices sharper, their presence heavier with each passing minute. The diner, once filled with the quiet hum of early morning peace, now felt like a drum tightening with every heartbeat. Patrons sensed the shift, but pretended not to. Silence was safer. Silence was easier. Silence was a learned habit in places where power announced itself loudly and without apology. Lena sat in her corner booth, as if watching the first ripple of a wave that would soon rise too high to ignore. She kept her gaze steady, her breathing controlled, her back straight. Years of training had sculpted her composure into something unbreakable. But inside her chest, a small tremor began to pulse. She had endured battlefields with more clarity than she felt in this diner. The officers' attention drifted toward her again and again, their stares lingering long enough to feel intentional. They saw the worn jacket, the loose clothes, the patched duffel bag. They saw someone whose presence did not seem to belong among their polished self-image. Lena knew exactly what they saw because she had been seen that way countless times before. Many assumed that a black woman with weary eyes and a travel-worn bag must be struggling, aimless, or misplaced. Few assumed strength. Fewer assumed sacrifice. The waitress approached the officer's booth with a pot of coffee, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. She poured their drinks with a quiet smile that failed to reach her eyes. Lena recognized the expression. It was the expression of someone who had learned to navigate the fragile terrain between appeasing authority and protecting herself. As the waitress stepped away, one officer leaned back and stretched his arm across the booth as if claiming the space. His gaze slid toward Lena once more. A smirk curled at the edge of his mouth. It was the smirk of a man who felt untouchable. His companions followed his line of sight, and subtle nods passed between them. Something unspoken had solidified. The storm moved closer. Lena felt her thoughts drift back to nights when she had slept in barracks that rattled with distant explosions. She remembered the tension of waiting, the unsteady predictability of danger, the way her body recognized threat before her mind fully processed it. The diner held a different kind of danger, quieter but strangely familiar. Prejudice had its own way of circling a target. Her coffee had cooled, untouched, for several minutes. She wrapped her hands around the cup anyway, letting the cold ceramic anchor her. Outside, the sky had darkened further, heavy with clouds that promised rain. Wind swept across the parking lot, lifting dust in unpredictable spirals. Nature mirrored the diner with eerie accuracy. A family entered the restaurant and took a seat near the windows. The children chattered softly while their parents scanned the menu. Their presence brought a fragile warmth to the room, but even that warmth dimmed beneath the tension that hung in the air. People could feel hostility even when it remained unspoken. It settled into the spaces between breaths. Lena reached for her duffel bag again, reminding herself of why she had come to this town. The folded letter inside represented recognition she had never expected to receive. It was an invitation to honor her resilience, yet she still questioned her own worthiness. She had been molded by a system that celebrated her service only when it needed her. Once she became injured, once her strength faltered, the celebration evaporated as if she had been nothing more than a tool. She pushed the letter deeper into the bag. She would attend the ceremony later. She would stand among others whose stories echoed her own. But for now, she needed this quiet moment before stepping back into a world that demanded constant endurance. The officers began to whisper again. Their eyes flicked toward her table with growing interest. One nudged the other. Another leaned forward, elbows on the table, as if strategizing. Their movements were small, but Lena had trained for years to read even the subtlest shifts. Body language carried entire conversations. Their conversation had turned into focus. She took slow breaths, steady and practiced. She reminded herself that she owed no explanations. She reminded herself that she had survived far worse than judgment. Yet the sting of being targeted in her own country always cut deeper than she expected. There was a specific pain in knowing that strangers felt entitled to diminish her humanity without knowing a single truth about her life. The diner door opened again, letting in a blast of cold air as an elderly couple entered. They moved with the gentle slowness of two people who had been together for decades. Lena watched them settle into a booth and share a soft smile. It was a simple moment, but it reminded her that goodness existed, even in rooms where cruelty brewed quietly. Just as the couple placed their order, the officers pushed themselves up from their seats. The scrape of the bench against the floor cut through the room like a warning siren. Conversations faltered. Forks paused mid-air. The waitress stiffened near the counter. The officers walked with deliberate steps, a trio moving as one, their boots thudding with the weight of unspoken intent. Lena did not look away. She had faced men who believed their authority granted them the right to invade, to intimidate, to dominate. She recognized this ritual. It was not unfamiliar. It was not surprising, but it was always disappointing. Her heartbeat steadied, not from fear, but from clarity. She placed her hand on the table once more, her fingertips brushing the object beneath them. She kept it partially concealed, not out of shame, but out of the understanding that people often revealed their character before they discovered hers. The officers slowed as they reached her booth. Their shadows spilled across her table, stretching like dark fingers that tried to claim the space. The lead officer crossed his arms. Another rested a hand near his belt. Their posture dripped with misplaced confidence. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Lena met their gazes with the calm of someone who had faced death and survived. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. It unsettled them, though they would never admit it. The tension had grown so thick that even the air felt heavy. A storm ready to break, a truth ready to surface. A moment suspended between ignorance and revelation. What lay beneath her hand on the table would soon decide everything, and none of them were ready for what they were about to see. The officers stood before Lena's table as if they were the appointed gatekeepers of the diner, self-elected judges of who belonged and who did not. Their presence pressed the air downward, heavy and expectant, drawing every curious eye toward the corner booth. The waitress froze mid-step. The elderly couple held hands a little tighter. Even the children at the window grew silent, sensing that something was unfolding that did not match the warm scent of pancakes and coffee. Lena remained still, her back straight, her shoulders steady, her face unreadable. She had mastered the art of controlled breath long ago. In the chaos of war, breath meant survival. In the chaos of prejudice, breath meant dignity. She inhaled deeply, and the quiet strength of that single motion unsettled the officers more than any confrontation could have. The lead officer leaned forward, his shadow stretching across her table like a stain. His posture radiated superiority, the kind that came from unchecked authority rather than earned respect. He did not see a veteran. He did not see a protector. He saw only a woman he believed he could diminish. In silence, he assessed her, scanning her jacket, her bag, her weary expression. His assumptions clung to him like armor. Power, without reflection, often disguised itself as confidence. One of the officers reached toward her duffel bag as if he had any right to touch it. Before his hand could make contact, Lena lifted her own hand from the table with slow, deliberate precision. The movement was small, almost gentle, but it shifted the entire atmosphere of the diner. It was as if she had drawn a line with nothing but stillness. Her hand revealed what had been partially hidden, a small metal box. Polished, though scratched by years of movement, lifted from her palm with reverence, and when she opened it with a soft click, the diner lights glinted against rows of neatly arranged ribbons, medals, and emblems. They were worn, but they radiated a presence that silenced the room far more effectively than any voice could. The officers stared, but comprehension had not yet reached them. Inside the box lay the Purple Heart. Beside it, the Bronze Star. Near it, the Army Commendation Medal with Valor. Symbols of sacrifice, symbols of service, symbols of wounds both visible and invisible. But at the center, set apart with intentional care, rested the folded notification of her honorable discharge, bearing her full name, Sergeant Lena Marshall, United States Army, combat veteran. The lead officer stepped back not from respect, but from disbelief that collided violently with the prejudices he carried. His posture faltered, his rigidity softened. A crack formed in the mask he wore so confidently. A ripple passed through the diner, a tangible shift in the way everyone perceived the woman they had quietly ignored only minutes before. Lena kept her gaze steady, her expression unchanging. She had revealed nothing of her emotions, nothing of the memories carved into her skin and soul. She allowed the truth to speak in the language of medals and ribbons, a language that even the most hardened skeptic struggled to refute. The second officer's smirk vanished, his jaw tightened. Shame crept into the spaces where arrogance had lived only moments earlier. He looked at the medals, then at her, unable to reconcile the image he had constructed with the truth laid bare before him. The third officer, the youngest of the group, swallowed hard. Something human flickered in his eyes, fragile and uneasy. He had not expected this. None of them had. The diner's silence deepened. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. Lena lifted one medal between her fingers, the Purple Heart. Its deep color reflected her steady eyes. She placed it gently on the table where the officers could not look away. The weight of it landed with a soft thud, lighter than the gravity it carried. She knew what they were thinking. She had seen these expressions before, faces collapsing under the sudden pressure of their own assumptions. It was the moment when prejudice met reality and realized it had been built on a foundation of ignorance. The lead officer cleared his throat. The sound cracked through the silence like something brittle. His confidence, once inflated, now wavered. The polished certainty that had guided his steps toward her now crumbled beneath the truth. He looked at the medals again, his jaw clenching with the realization that he had misjudged someone whose sacrifices dwarfed his understanding of service. Lena did not need to speak. Her silence held more power than any confrontation could have offered. As the officers stood frozen, the waitress took a hesitant step forward. She looked at the medals, then at Lena, and her eyes softened with genuine understanding. She placed a fresh cup of hot coffee on the table, an unspoken gesture of honor. The elderly couple watched with tears welling slowly. The man straightened his posture in a silent salute. The children stared with wide eyes, absorbing the moment the way only children could, without filters, without prejudice, with pure awe. The officers, once towering figures, now seemed smaller, deflated by the weight of their own actions. They stepped back from her table, discomfort settling on their shoulders like an unwelcome coat. Their arrogance had melted, leaving them exposed to the truth of their own failure. Lena closed the metal box with quiet grace, each click of the latch sealing the revelation in finality. She did not gloat, she did not scold, she did not demand an apology. Her restraint made the moment even more powerful. She simply gathered her things with the calm of someone who had carried far heavier burdens through far harsher landscapes. She slid the metal box back into her duffel bag, then wrapped her fingers around the handle with steady strength. The officers struggled to meet her gaze, but she did not look at them again. She had nothing more to prove. The truth had spoken for itself. As she rose from her booth, the room shifted around her, not out of fear, but out of respect. Every eye followed her with a reverence that had not existed only minutes earlier. The officers parted to make way for her, the space between them heavy with regret. Not one of them reached out. Not one of them attempted to reclaim their authority. The imbalance of power had reversed itself so completely that they could only stand in the ruins of their own assumptions. Lena stepped past them, her head high, her presence commanding without force. She walked toward the door, her boots steady, her spirit unbroken. Behind her, the truth lingered, a truth they could never unsee, a truth that would haunt them long after she left that diner. Rain had begun to fall outside the diner by the time Lena stepped through the door. The droplets came slow at first, tapping gently against the pavement before gathering strength. It was as if the sky itself released a breath it had been holding during the tension inside. The wind lifted loose strands of her hair, brushing them across her cheek as she tightened her grip on the duffel bag. Each step carried the weight of the moment she had left behind, but also the lightness of truth finally revealed. Inside the diner, silence lingered long after the door closed behind her. The officers remained rooted in place, their expressions hollowed by the magnitude of their mistake. The lead officer stared at the door as if expecting Lena to reappear, as if hoping for a chance to rewrite the last 10 minutes. But the truth had already carved itself into the room, permanent and undeniable. The waitress gathered herself and slowly approached the officers. Her face held no judgment, but the disappointment in her eyes spoke volumes. Without a word, she removed their cups of coffee and walked away. It was a quiet act of disapproval, but in a small town where gestures often meant more than speeches, it resonated. The elderly couple whispered softly to one another before the man lifted his trembling hand toward the officers. His fingers formed a shaky but unmistakable salute, directed not at them, but toward the memory of the woman who had just walked out. It was a silent reminder of the honor they had failed to recognize. Across the diner, the children watched with wide, confused eyes. They did not fully understand what had happened, but they understood enough to know something wrong had been revealed, and something right had emerged in its place. Their mother placed a gentle hand on their shoulders, perhaps hoping that this moment would plant a future seed of empathy rather than bias. Outside, Lena walked toward her car with steady steps. The rain dampened her jacket, but the weight she carried inside felt lighter now. She had not come to that diner seeking respect. She had not come for recognition or gratitude. She had come only for a quiet meal and a moment of rest. But life had a way of placing truth in the paths of those who most needed to see it. As she reached her car, she paused and looked up at the rain-filled sky. Memories rose within her not just of the medals she carried, but of the people who had fought beside her, the friends she had lost, the sacrifices that never appeared in newspapers or ceremonies. She thought of the nights she had spent awake, wrestling with pain and questions she never voiced aloud. She thought of the countless moments when strangers had judged her without knowing the story beneath her scars. For a long moment, she simply stood there, allowing the rain to wash over her as if cleansing the remnants of the diner's tension. She did not feel anger. She did not feel triumph. Instead, she felt a quiet affirmation of who she was beyond labels, assumptions, or prejudice. She opened her car door and placed the duffel bag in the passenger seat. Her fingers brushed lightly against the metal box inside, and she felt the familiar hum of purpose return to her chest. Ahead of her lay the ceremony she had agreed to attend, a gathering of veterans whose stories echoed hers, each carrying their own weights of struggle, resilience, and overlooked courage. She knew now that she would walk through those doors with her head held high. Back inside the diner, the officers finally returned to their booth with slow, uncertain steps. Their confidence had evaporated. Their earlier laughter had been replaced by a heavy silence. The lead officer sat with his elbows on the table, his face buried in his hands. He had encountered many difficult moments in his career, but none had shaken him the way this one did. For the first time, he was forced to confront the reality of his own biases. He had always believed himself to be fair. He had always believed that his authority came with integrity. But prejudice had seeped into his actions without his awareness, guiding his assumptions, shaping his decisions, and revealing a truth he could no longer ignore. His companions sat across from him, each grappling with his own wave of shame. They replayed the moment in their minds, realizing the ease with which they had judged Lena, the casual cruelty of their assumptions, the arrogance that had clouded their perception. They felt the weight of the medals they had seen, not in their hands, but in their hearts. Eventually, the youngest officer rose from the booth. His gaze lingered on the empty corner where Lena had sat. He felt something shift inside him, something unfamiliar but necessary. He realized that the image he held of authority, strength, and service had been reshaped in an instant, not by force, but by truth. The waitress approached their table again, but this time she did not refill their coffee. Her voice was calm but firm as she reminded them that their actions carried consequences, even when unspoken. She walked away before they could respond, leaving them with the silence they needed to confront their own reflection. Outside, Lena started the engine of her car, the rain tapping softly against the windshield. She glanced at the diner one last time, not with bitterness, but with the quiet understanding that change often began in uncomfortable moments. She did not wish harm upon the men who had misjudged her. She did not need their apology. She needed only the truth to stand unmasked, and it had. As she drove away, the road stretched before her like a path toward healing. The world still held its shadows. Injustice still lingered in too many corners. But moments like the one in the diner revealed something powerful, that truth had a way of exposing darkness, of forcing reflection, of shifting hearts that believed they were immovable. She allowed herself a small breath of relief, not victory, not closure, just relief. She would continue forward, carrying her medals, not as proof for others, but as symbols of her journey. She would honor her story by living it fully, without apology. And she would remain a reminder that the people society overlooks often carry the deepest strength, the quietest courage, and the stories that can change everything. Back in the diner, the officers finally rose from their booth with humbled expressions. Their exit was far quieter than their entrance had been. They walked out into the rain with lowered heads, the sound of each raindrop echoing their unspoken realization. Everyone in the diner watched them leave. A silent understanding passed among the patrons. Something had changed. Something had been exposed. And no one would forget the woman who had walked in unnoticed, but left as a living testament to truth, honor, and the power of humility. The question lingered in the air long after she was gone. Would you have treated her differently? Sometimes the ones we ignore are the ones we should honor most. Thank you for experiencing this story. If you believe these truths must be told, if you want more powerful narratives that challenge injustice and reveal hidden courage, then subscribe to Racism Untold Stories. Your support ensures that these voices continue to rise and inspire change.